All right, hello. We're waiting for people to come in here. Hello, thank you for being with us. It's morning here. It's afternoon for Heather there on the East Coast. So thanks for being with us. We're really excited about this one. And I'll throw it over to Heather.
Yeah, thanks, Rochelle. Definitely not raining today in Vermont, so happy that the sun is shining. Joined here with Jay. I was meeting with Jay earlier today. We've already had a powwow session, and I know that he's updated today's webinar with the latest information fresh off the press this morning. So this is definitely something we hope retailers, our association partners, suppliers, the entire industry finds value in this webinar. And, just looking towards the future, it's going to be rough. We have to continue to work together to help each other and to, be a collective industry with a collective voice. So I'm going to turn it over to Jay. Jay, thank you so much for your continued support of the NBDA, of retailers and the industry at large.
Well, thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are in the country. Thanks to Rochelle and to Heather for that introduction. For those of you that don't know me, I am Jay Townley, and I'm the resident futurist at Human Powered Solutions. And if you've been on webinars with me before, you know that I'm going to turn my audio off at this, or my video off at this point. Hopefully keep the audio on for a number of reasons, not the least of which is to make sure that we can focus on the slides as we go forward. What we'll be presenting today is the supply chain nightmare and how bike shops can prosper, which I think is the important piece. This is going to be a factual and current look, as Heather said, through this morning, at the bicycle business supply chain. And we're going to focus on what bike shops can take away and use to improve profitability and grow their locally owned businesses. Now, this webinar is the 6th, believe it or not, the 6th in a series of 8 webinars featuring each of the 16 chapters of the NBDA U.S. Bicycle Market Overview 2020 report. And I will admit up front that this particular webinar is based on a op-ed piece done in Brain last month, and then connected to issues that, and some of the slides you'll see, some of the visuals you'll see are from the U.S. Bicycle Market Overview report. Also, those of you that have been in webinars with me in the past know that it takes a while for us to get to the next slide, which I am working on at this point. Not exactly sure why it takes so long to do that. Every time we do one of these, I test moving on, and we end up with this little lag time. And it's either my computer, which I can't believe, or Zoom. There we go. So, like I said, it just takes a while. We're going to begin with an introduction, as we do with all our webinars, including how to best use the NBDA U.S. Bicycle Market Overview 2020 report, which I'm assuming you have just purchased or are considering purchasing, whether you're a retail member or an associate member of the NBDA. So first, read through the whole report, all 125 pages. And this is going to take probably several mornings or evenings, depending on the pace you apply here, and the time you've got available. But there are lots of up-to-date tables, charts, and illustrations. So that's why I want you to go through it thoroughly, because there's, in some cases, 20 to 21 years of history up through 2020. Now, this is going to give you an overview of the current U.S. bicycle market and business going into this year, into 2021. Second, determine which chapters and data sets will be most helpful for your business and strategic planning. This is both for retailers and for the associate members. And yes, I am advising that you write a business plan for your bike shop business or for your business, whether it's an associate member, a supplier, or not. Third, carefully reread and study the last 4 chapters and extract the suggested business strategies for your review and consideration that are applicable to your specialty bicycle retail business. There are 4 key takeaways from your reading of the NBDA U.S. Bicycle Market Overview Report. And this, by the way, of your reading of it, and the following, this chapter of the webinars and the following 2 chapters that will follow. Now, what I'd like you to do is consider these 4 key takeaways. Write down your most important findings from the 2020 report and this webinar, and commit to your own business plan, as I said previously, with financial benchmarks and key performance indicators known as KPIs. And look up the anniversary date of your NBDA membership, whether it's a dealer membership or an associate membership, and put it on your calendar to make sure you renew your NBDA membership. And for the retail members, join an NBDA P2 group, please. I realize there's an extra cost involved, but take a look at it from the standpoint of what your business can set aside so that you can pay the fee to become an NBDA P2 group member. Do this as soon as this webinar is finished. Visit nbda.com and take action to join this bike shop business intelligence network. You will not regret it. Now let's take a look at today's agenda. And I'm going to go through this quickly because there's a lot of material in this webinar. And I want to be sure not only we get through it, but that we have ample time for Q&A. And please keep in mind that any questions we don't get to at the end, Rachel will make sure that, Rochelle will make sure that they are sent my way, and I will answer them offline for you. So the agenda for today, we're going to start with a look at the reality of an import-dependent market that determines the supply chain and the related logistics. And we'll peel back to better understand the asymmetric disruptions of the past 20 months, including black swan events like COVID-19, and then the disruptive effect of climate change. We're going to follow this by an in-depth look at the American bicycle business supply chain and logistics. And that's up to date through this morning. And why it's important to understand a rolling definition of normal. And we'll explain that. And this is going to lead to what bike shops can do by staying flexible and thinking outside the box. And then we're going to look at the future and what it holds for the American bicycle business, the bike shops, and the suppliers. And then we're going to wrap up with a Q&A session. For those of you that are familiar with the op-ed piece from last month that was in Brain, this is one of the tables, table 1. It shows the reality of an import-dependent market for the past 10 years, from 2011 through last year, 2020. So let me explain this a bit. This is the history of domestic production as a percent of total, imports as a percent of total. The total here, by the way, does not include e-bikes or used bikes. These are strictly pedal bicycles or acoustic bikes, as I've come to learn they are being called in the trade. So domestic bicycle production and assembly in the U.S. went from less than 1 percentage point from 2011 through 2013 to a high of about 4% we estimated in 2017, again in 2019, and about 3.7% in 2020, the last year. Imports, 99% through the 2011, 2012, 2013, fluctuated a little bit, ending up in about 96 percentile in 2019 and 2020. Keep in mind that the domestic percent here is an estimate we put together with a Delphi panel. At 3.7%, this is considered high. I just want to point that out. I got chewed out by a couple of folks in the bike industry for it being this high, but that gives you an idea of the import dependency. So if you have any doubts about this, this is data taken from the Commerce Department for the import percentage, which is the dominant number. And then in turn, the estimate is in the domestic percentage. So the smallest piece of this is what we're estimating as opposed to the factual real information from the Customs Bureau relative to the import percentages. Table 2, this I find fascinating. This is 2018, 2019, 2020. By the way, I've just discovered I can move the cursor around so you can see all these things. I can point them out to you. And what we're showing here is the countries of origin: China, Taiwan, Cambodia, Vietnam, and then all other countries, making the U.S. world total of U.S. bicycle imports for the 4 years. In 2018, which was pre-COVID, but was also the year that the punitive 301 tariffs went into effect, the 25% punitive tariffs. So in 2018, China was 94.9% of total U.S. imports. Taiwan was 3.4%, Cambodia 0.7%, Vietnam wasn't even on the board as far as a percentage, and then all other countries at 1%. In 2019, now in 2019, the industry was trying to respond to and figure out what to do about the Section 301 punitive tariffs. As I've said before, and as the total at 12.9 million shows, compared to 2019 and 2020, was a low year, and that was artificially so. This is not a market reflection of the market. There wasn't a downturn in market demand. In fact, it was pretty steady. What occurred here is U.S. importers of bicycles made a determination that to not pay the 25% additional punitive tariff, they would reduce the number of product brought into the country under that additional tariff. China, under those conditions, was almost 90%. Taiwan, where production started to move back to Taiwan, to Cambodia and Vietnam in 2019, went up to 6.2%, almost 800,000 units from under 600,000 units. Cambodia went up to 0.8%, Vietnam to 0.8%, all other countries by 0.1%. And then we get to 2020, the first year of the COVID. And in 2020, by the way, the punitive tariff of 25% was suspended, was told for the bulk of that year because of exemptions. Chinese units, 88.9%, 89% of all US imports. Taiwan dropped down to 4.4%. Cambodia came up as production shifted to just under 800,000 units at a 4.75%. Vietnam stayed about the same. All other countries increased slightly, but still China was the dominant import source country in 2020, the first year of the COVID. It hit, if you recall, in March of 2020, and we've dealt with it for the last 20 months. This slide deals with U.S. bicycle import duty and the percent of China for imports in 2019, 2020, and 2021. So to explain this, off of the left-hand side are harmonized tariff schedule numbers under 8712 with the extension 1510, which is 19-inch wheel or less. These are kids' bikes. These are the 18-inch, 16-inch, 14-inch, 12-inch children's bicycles. 1520 is 20-inch wheel bikes. 1550 is 24-inch wheel bikes. 2500 is 27-inch and 700C. These are the lightweight bicycles, the racing bikes, the drop bar product, the high-end product. 3500 are 26-inch wheel. This is where the bulk of mountain bikes come in. And then we've got 8711, this is opposed to 8712, were e-bikes. Relative to tariffs in 2019, all other countries And these are standard. These are the tariffs that have been in effect, my friends, since I was young. 11% on the small bikes, 11% on 20-inch wheel, 11% on 24-inch, 5.5% on lightweight, 11% on 26-inch wheel, and e-bikes were zero, no tariff, except for Chinese imports. In 2019, the 25% is on top of the 11, 36% for small bikes coming in from mainland China, 36% for 20-inch wheel, 36% for 24-inch wheel, 30.5% for lightweight, 36% for 26-inch wheel, and 25% for e-bikes. So we don't have to flip back to the other chart. The point here is that Chinese imports as a source country in 2019 were 89.8%, almost 90% of all U.S. imports of bicycles of all sizes. 2020, first year of the COVID, we had a tolling of the punitive tariffs. They were suspended, exempted. So for all bicycles, the standard tariffs were in effect, 11% for China and all other countries. For all the small bikes or 24-inch wheel or smaller, 5.5% for the lightweight bikes, 11% for mountain bike and 26-inch wheel bicycles, and back to zero for e-bikes. China, 88.9, 89% of U.S. imports that year, the first year of the COVID. 2021 is tracking at the same levels as 2019 and 2020. In other words, whether the punitive tariffs are in effect or not, at this particular point, depending on whether the punitive tariffs have been passed through or not, the American consumer is continuing to purchase bicycles sourced in mainland China. The fact remains on a worldwide basis that global ability to produce in North America, South America, rest of Asia, in Europe, in the case of bicycles, like many other commodities, that world capacity cannot replace at this point in time, as we sit in August of 2021, the worldwide capacity to produce bicycles cannot replace the capacity that's available in China, and in fact, the bike industry continues to use as its primary source country. Now, this leads to what we call asymmetric disruptions. Now, you can look this up. It's well worth understanding, because essentially it means having parts that fail to correspond to one another, that are out of balance. And that's the story of the bicycle supply chain and the logistics. It got out of whack. It got out of balance. They don't correspond to each other. An example would be a brand friend of mine told me that one of his warehouses has approximately 14 empty containers waiting to be picked up. Normally they have 5. They can't be picked up because there's a shortage of drivers. Now, with every container is what's called a caisson. That is the bed that it sits on, that has the wheels that allow, and the connector that allow to the tractor that allow it to be pulled. But that's the story throughout the United States. There are empty containers sitting at warehouses because there's a lack of drivers to move them back to the ports. There's a lack of containers at the ports. There's a lack of empties going back to these source countries, in this case, China. There's a lack of containers at the ports of demarcation. There's a lack of containers at the factories. And so the parts of the supply chain have failed to correspond to each other. They've failed to be in sync as they were prior to the COVID. And we are struggling to get them back into sync. Now, I want you to keep in mind that there are also asymmetric opportunities. Not asymmetric disruption is bad. Example, the stock market. we bet a little bit on stocks, and we are betting in many cases on an asymmetric opportunity. The fact that a particular stock is out of sync with the market. And it may be higher, or it may be an opportunity to buy low, but asymmetric doesn't necessarily mean bad. But if the parts are out of sync, which they are in our supply chain at this point, we've got a problem. And you've got ripples and waves. They are called in the trade the bullwhip effect, that will crop up and change the flow of distribution. Now let's dig into this. We've got COVID-19 and black swan events. What the heck is a black swan event? Well, it's an unpredictable event that is beyond what is normally expected of a situation and has potentially severe consequences. COVID-19. Black swan events are characterized by their extreme rarity. The last pandemic was the flu of 2018. Their severe impact. Look at what happened to employment, stock markets, the economies across the world, and the widespread insistence they are obvious in hindsight. How many experts popped up when COVID hit and said we should have known, we should have done something about it? The concept of black swan events is not old. It's about a dozen years, back to 2008. They were popularized by the writer Nassim Nicholas Taleb in his book, The Black Swan, the impact of the highly improbable. The essence of his work is that the world is severely affected by events that are rare and difficult to predict. As I said, in hindsight, yeah, the experts will step forward and say, I told you so, or you should have known. But the reality is very difficult to predict, as the COVID was, and the impact that the COVID has had and continues to have on the market. Now, climate change, the IPCC report. What in the heck am I talking about? Well, this is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, convened under the United Nations. And on Monday, August 9th of this year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change presented a scientific consensus representing the most complete synthesis of climate science available. The consensus: 1, it's too late to reverse the damage done. 2, it is not too late to change course right away to prevent things from getting far worse. Something that is a whole webinar unto itself that we need to discuss. But this also is part and parcel of the change we need to be aware of and to factor into our business planning in the bicycle business in the United States. We've got COVID to contend with because it continues. And it's not done yet. And it's going to impact our businesses. It is disrupting the supply chain and creating the supply chain nightmare. And climate change has now been defined. It's been embraced by the scientific community in toto, and we now have an issue to deal with that's going to affect bicycling, bicycle riders, and a piece of our business, which I'll describe as we move forward. Now, the IPCC report doesn't present one future. You can get it online, take a look at it, or look at a synopsis. Its most important finding is that there are several futures possible. And the American bicycle business can play a major role. We are a non-polluting, environmentally friendly product. We are transportation to move people from point A to point B, or point B to point C. There are two things to be aware of, and I'm not going to harp on this. I'm just going to mention it because, like I said, this is a whole discussion that goes along with the supply chain disruptions. But there is, my friends, no going back to normal. We can't get back there because it doesn't exist. The climate report makes it abundantly clear that in the short term, the next 30 years, you can't go back. We may never be able to go back to the way it was. However, as I said, there are asymmetric opportunities. What we have to be aware of in the bicycle business is called the rhetoric of distraction. Hey, we're going to go back to normal, just give it time. Well, no, we are not going to go back to the normal riding in cars, polluting the atmosphere. We are going to go on to a whole new rolling normal that includes the bicycle and e-bikes as an alternate means of transportation that are going to make the world better. But if climate creates a situation where consumers can't ride, we need to take that activity indoors. And you've already seen the move in that direction, and it creates an opportunity for bike shops under the overall disruptions of both of these phenomena. But be aware and be leery of the rhetoric of distraction, because I've already seen it inside the bike industry where entities are telling us in bike shops, as suppliers, as the bicycling community, as the bicycle community, hey, it's going to go back the way it was. Well, it's not. And we have to be very wary of and think forward, think to the future, and not be distracted by the rhetoric that we're going to hear about. It's going to go back to the way it was. Now, the supply chain nightmare. Now, this is current information, and I want to go through this because I know you've heard different pieces about what this is all about and what it means and what's happening. And this is just a fraction, or maybe a little more than that, but this is just a piece of what there's out there. This is a chart from this probably last week on freight rates surges and the fact that freight rates have surged to their highest levels in history of container shipping. You guys know how far back container shipping goes? Well, I got into purchasing and logistics on or about 80, 81 or 82. The container and container shipping methodology had been invented by the then president of U.S. Lines, which consequently went bankrupt over the next 10 years. But he was the dude that figured it out. So sometime in the 70s is when the history of container shipping started. And this particular chart goes back to August. Here I got my little cursor again. August of 2019. And the freight rates for ocean freight shipping coming out of 2020 and the COVID going through 2021, where we are today, headed toward August of 2021, are at the highest levels we've seen in the history of this particular form of moving goods throughout the world. So when I say a rolling definition of normal, it's we have to move goods, we have to get product into the marketplace. So therefore, this is the normal today. We have to figure out how to work with this. I heard this morning that one of the top 3 bike brands has published on its website freight rate differentials, or if you will, the premium, so that dealers can pass this on to consumers and explain to consumers what the additional cost is. I believe that was about $30. This current rate increase that we're looking at for today, and I looked at it last night, one of my partners, Brad Hughes, looked at it and said, look, this is averaging about $150 per bicycle on average coming in from China to West Coast ports. So while we're catching up with a $30 freight differential for ocean freight based on where the container rates were somewhere down here, we've got this to look forward to. It's the reality. We're going to have to figure out how to deal with this. This is above $100 per unit on the average 40-foot container full of bikes. This continues the rolling definition of normal. But from the standpoint of those folks that are involved in the logistics side of the bike business for the domestic producer, assembler, and we're going to talk a little bit about Cat Trike toward the end of this presentation, out of Orlando, Florida, adult tries, but the high end of that adult try business. Here's the container shipping disruption. The number of ships waiting at berth at port as of August 13th. So 26 would be LA and the probably Long Beach. 12 would be Port of New York, Newark. 16 for the ports of Europe. Look at mainland China. 133 ships waiting to berth at a port. 10 would be Taiwan. So it gives you an idea today of the number of ships that are out there waiting to get in to either unload or load. Now, I know you guys don't subscribe to the Wall Street Journal on a regular basis. Wall Street Journal has a feature article every day called Logistics Report. This is from the Logistics Report, the Wall Street Journal, August 23rd, Monday of this week. This is what they call a quotable from Lars Jensen. About 10% of the global container capacity is stacked on ships stuck outside congested ports, which we've just seen the world distribution of. This is an asymmetric, out of sync piece of the puzzle that didn't exist pre-COVID. You simply didn't have this stack up of ships. They flowed in, they were unloaded, the containers went on to destinations, the ships went back carrying empty containers to the source countries. Containers went to the factories loaded them up, process was repeated. Today, you got 10% of the global container capacity stacked up on ships stuck outside the ports. This is from the same Wall Street Journal Logistics Report from August 23rd. This happens to be the number of the day. They publish one of these every day. The number of the day, 5.2. Average days incoming containers waiting to leave by truck from the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach in July, up from 4.76 days in June and breaking the record of 5.12 days in January. This according to the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association. So this gives you an idea of when a container ship docks, they unload it. The average container sits in a yard at the port for 5.2 days before it gets on a truck and leaves the yard. Again, asymmetric disruption in the rolling definition of normal. I promise there's not many more of these, but I hope you find this at least as interesting as I do from the standpoint of factual information. This is the global scheduling reliability. And as you see, it's got 2018, when I would book a sailing in China on a container ship, over 70% of the times I booked that, it sailed when they scheduled it to sail. And my container arrived when the steamship line, and they still call them that, by the way, when the steamship line said it would be arriving at the port and I could pick it up and take it into my warehouse. High 70s. In 2019, that went up. It pushed 80% or above, as you could see, 80% of the time. 2020, the first year of the COVID, workers couldn't get to the ports. Ports got shut down. Workers couldn't get to warehouses. It dropped down to just above 40% reliability, 42, 43, 44% of the time. When I booked a sailing, I booked a ship, it was on time. 2021, this black line started below 40. And you can see the months here, January, February, March. March was the best. Started to sag, came back a little bit June of 2021, all along the 40% line. That means 60% of the time when I booked a sailing, it was late. Only 40% roughly was it on time. So I can't count on the schedules because of asymmetric disruption, when things don't match, don't sync, because there's no containers, because the sailings are late, because the ships are late. Everything gets backed up and out of sync, and it gets tilted, and there's nothing they can do to bring it back. You simply have to live with it as the new definition of normal, the rolling definition of normal for this point in time. Part of what I'm trying to say here is that this information in detail should be presented to bike shops on a regular basis so you know what's going on. Then in turn, we'll get to what you can do to plan at your end, but you at least should have this kind of presentation from your brand suppliers to let you know what the situation is in the market. Now, there's also been some conversation about what are the big guys doing to buy either capacity at container plants or at, component plants, or buying capacity at frame manufacturing or fork manufacturing, or buying capacity from OEMs, the final assemblers of product. That's true. That's true. Some of the big brands will admit it, some won't, but we're very aware because the brands and manufacturers, the OEMs, the component suppliers are making it abundantly clear to smalls and mids who come in and want to place orders that they can't. The supplier will not accept the order because they're booked out. They're booked out because bigger people with more money came in and bought capacity. This is happening. This is a headline from the 17th of August. Walmart charters vessels to beat holiday shipping crunch. In the bigger world, and Walmart being the largest seller of bicycles in the American market, is in the bigger world, Walmart is buying or chartering full vessels and filling them up to get goods in for the holiday shipping season. This is August, holidays being Christmas, New Year's. I'm sure Thanksgiving gets filtered into that, but end of the year holidays. And so the brands, retailers, suppliers with money, and right now the COVID has created a positive cash flow for many of the players, are able to expend that money, those funds, in buying capacity. And the buying of capacity, by its very nature, unfortunately freezes out some of the smaller people. And we've got to look at that as part of the rolling definition of normal, because we can't buy our way out of it. We can't fight our way out of it. We just have to be aware of it. And then do what we can at our end. Because remember, this is a long pipeline. The supply chain has an end point to it where it serves the consumer, and it's got a beginning point to it where raw material is coming into component plants to make the various component pieces. And it runs all the way through. We charted this at one point and came up with 16 to 18 individual touch points within the typical bicycle supply chain. And the end result is the folks with money are able to charter vessels, whole container ships, in order to make sure all their goods get on, that they've got some reliability to their schedule. They're dealing with a rolling definition, creating a rolling definition of normal, in their particular case, at a point where they could buy some of the pieces that are out of sync, asymmetric, bumping into each other, causing problems in their supply chain. And I promise we're going to end this section of the session. This is the New York Times Logistics Report for August 24th, 2021. And the article is about what an adult tricycle says about the world's bottleneck problems. The adult tricycle here, by the way, because the article is public, is Catrike. Some of you are Catrike dealers. Catrike is the premium top end, creme de la creme of the adult tri market. And this is the adult tri is the adult recumbent market. The supply chain problems rocking companies may get worse heading into the holidays as delays continue to snarl global trade and shipping prices jump even higher. So even for a U.S. assembler, or in the case of Catrike, a U.S. manufacturer, there are problems getting components in. The one that's cited in this article is Shimano derailleurs. But there are also other components that are charted out. And this article, if you get into it, is a really interesting article to look at the, going back to an op-ed that was posted probably in the first quarter of this year. Why can't we do more domestic? Why can't we make more in this country? Well, it's problematical, and this goes to the issue of that rolling definition of normal and how a US-based Orlando, Florida manufacturer of high-end adult product in our industry has problems and delays because of the componentry side of the business. It also goes to a brutal truth and a part of our rolling definition of normal for the American bicycle shop business. One of my colleagues who's an expert in logistics, Dave Carnabogue, relayed to us Friday in our regular weekly meeting that he had met with the senior staff of OOCL, which is one of the largest container line shippers in the world. The U.S. Head of the U.S., I believe the head of, or at least a senior person in the office, the U.S. office, who opined that these disruptions are going to last through August of 2022. In other words, another year. They may not be all the disruptions in the manufacturing cycle or side of the pipeline, but referring specifically to the logistics and ocean freight portion, the feeling was, as of Friday of last week, that the disruptions could last for another year. And we are going to have to plan for that. We are going to have to take it as a reality and then think through carefully how we do the business planning at the bike shop level to make sure that we stay flexible, that we need to communicate with key suppliers and brands no less than weekly. I would advise that if you've got the bandwidth, you communicate with your suppliers and brands twice a week. Be a pest. Make sure they're telling you this kind of information. Make sure that you can chart out for every key supplier what their schedules are and what problems they're running into. Look at the probabilities of when you're going to get product you've ordered. Get clarification about what your options are under the authorized dealer agreements you have in place. If you don't know what you've signed, either read it, have an advisor read it, or have the rep come in and explain it to you. And if they won't, keep going until you get a clarification of what you can and can't do, what your options are, what they will allow under the authorized dealer agreements that you sign. Investigate the availability of other brands and products and what their requirements are. And you may have to make a choice, because we're talking if, in fact, the disruptions last 6 months to a year, you, especially bicycle retailers, in many cases are going to have to plan for the future, because you want your business to not only survive, but thrive. And the only way to do that is to plan your way through it and plan flexibly. Investigate regional and locally made products. They're cropping up all over the country. Take a look at the recumbent market in its totality. Take a look at the regional product available to you. Take a look and find the locally made products and whether you can do what I've seen dealers doing, reported in Brain, reaching out and actually connecting and becoming dealers for. And we'll discuss that when we get to the next slide. But some of this is becoming a dealer for a company that is manufacturing offshore that wants to get into the U.S. market and has product available. Now, be careful on the product liability side, certainly. Be very mindful of the care and feeding of lithium-ion batteries from the standpoint of e-bikes. But with that said, investigate the availability of other brands and products. And also make sure you investigate the regional and the locally made products that are available to you or can be made available to you. Investigate other related and crossover outdoor products. I was just working in the NBDA booth talking to Heather and Rochelle about the Big Gear show 2 weeks ago. And a lot of the bike dealers that were there were doing just that. It was an outdoor show, so they were looking at related and crossover outdoor products that they could bring into their retail stores, offer to their consumers, and this goes to a curated line. You're developing the line you feel is best suited to your neighborhood, to your clientele. You're curating it and you're making it available. Investigate those possibilities. Do not leave out, by the way, indoor cycling, which has become not only viable, but under the current climate conditions and the climate challenges is going to become absolutely essential in some parts of the country. You need to think outside the box. You need to stop and walk away from the folks that want you to believe it's going to get back to the way it was, that are distracting you from the reality of what you need to survive, to grow, to prosper in the future. You need to think outside the box. E-bikes, certainly for those of you that don't have them, and this goes back to look at all of the supply source available to you, including those that want to get into this market in this country. Just be very mindful of the care and feeding of lithium ion batteries, please. Take a look at cargo and family bikes and the local purveyors of same. Take a look at the Friends of the NBDA, the associate members of the National Bicycle Dealers Association. Look at recumbents and recumbency. It has become a very viable segment. We call it the niche that graduated. It's not just Cat Trike. It's many other brands in the U.S. market of recumbents. Some of them are made here, some are imported from Europe, some are imported from Asia. And while some of them are electric assist, so you could continue with the electrification of product, you've got many that also represent the ability of an adult consumer who no longer can deal with the pain or the physical problems of riding a regular bicycle. That can get on a recumbent, and it's like sitting in a lawn chair. Please take a look at the opportunity. Look at custom product. Custom product. This also means locally made. What can you do to buy frames, forks, and componentry that's locally made, that greatly enhances your ability to service consumers or a portion of your consumer base, and do it in a timely fashion in the market, and perhaps even bring it into your retail store as a feature for a feature that customers can come and look at. They sit on a stool now and talk to the wrench, have them sit on a stool and watch their bike being made. Indoor cycling. This is climate related. We started to track this 5 years ago. Indoor cycling became popular in those markets where the summers became so hot that avid cyclists couldn't ride outside anymore. Houston, Texas. And you create environments where the avid cyclists could come inside to a climate control area, air conditioned. They could go into their homes. You provide the equipment for that. You look at the electronic interfaces. You look at all of the things they could do, where the gaming industry now has come to indoor cycling and creating the means by which an individual can ride against a whole pack of people from around the world, or can ride the stages of the tour. Look at indoor cycling as an alternative and a way to grow your business and maintain your customer base. Rent to buy and leasing. Take a look at thinking outside the box relative to multiple ownership of a bike, multiple ownership of an e-bike. Look at the circular economy. What is that? Well, it's previously owned stuff. It's used stuff. I've told you before, I'm an old guy, but I don't buy new stuff if I don't have to. I go to my local St. Vinny's, and there's 3 of them in the area. And if I shop for something, I shop at secondhand stores first. But the circular economy and what I'm doing is just not old people, is extremely popular among the younger generation of Americans who believe very firmly in recycling, in reusing, in previously owned products, and it's spread to the internet. Guided tours. Can you give guided tours of your neighborhood, of your city, of your town, and charge for that as another revenue stream? And it goes on and on. There's insurance. There's all sorts of other related industry and product opportunities. But think outside of the box. Look carefully at adjusting your business plan to what you can provide to keep your business not only growing but prospering, but also servicing your consumers and keeping them coming into your place of business. So from now to the future. This has changed slightly from what those of you that have followed this webinar series have seen from us before, in that we're now talking about the great tragedy of COVID, and it was a tragedy, but still it created an opportunity, and we've added to that climate change. if you start with the NBDA Bicycle Market Overview Report, you'll take a look at what we call an inflection point. And we think very, very clearly that the bullet point that's third down here, the 2020, 2021 are inflection points. 2020 is an inflection point relative to what the COVID did to the economy. 2021 is an inflection point about what climate change has done to the U.S. economy. They are inflection points because they also are bringing to the fore environmental, social, and governance integration. It's called ESG relative to companies. And so this great tragedies created opportunities for the American bicycle shops and also for the associate members of the NBDA. And they've created those opportunities in your local communities, starting with what we call in the market overview report, the Bicycling Relevance Index. The perception that bicycles and bicycling are viable solutions. I don't know if you realize this, folks, but for decades, the bicycle business has spent time and money in great measure on building and enhancing the perception of bicycles and bicycling as viable solutions. The black swan economic event and public health crisis of COVID-19 and the pandemic have accomplished in 6 to 8 months what the bicycle business has labored at for 45 to 46 years since the end of the last bike boom. And now another tragedy comes, the climate crisis. But it too has opportunity, because while we've got the asymmetric disruption, we also have the asymmetric opportunity that we can take advantage of if we are not distracted by the rhetoric of distraction. It's not going back to the way it was. There's a new rolling reality, a new rolling normal, and it changes regularly, in some cases week to week, and we simply have to be prepared to roll with it. The surge in retail sales dollars and revenue are an added bonus. And as we come out of the pandemic, and we will, to the post-COVID period, although it's been pushed back into 2022, when we emerge from that tunnel, we'll be at a point where the perception of the bicycle has changed, and it's our opportunity to make that perception the reality of the future. And we need the industry to get behind us and make sure that happens. But bicycle shops are still the key to making that happen in their local communities. So, in summary, see how we're doing on time here. Yeah, not too bad. Not as much time for questions as I would have liked, but still some time for questions. We've looked at the reality of the import-dependent market. Happy to talk more about that, but wanted to give you the flavor of that. We've looked at asymmetric disruptions. I hope that I got the point across that these are when things don't mesh, when they're out of sync, when they're spinning off and not finding their balance. And so far it's been COVID-19, which was the black swan event, and then climate change that we've seen. Now it's in its totality relative to the IPCC report and the impact that's going to have going forward, primarily on the issues of outdoor cycling compared to indoor cycling. We've looked in detail at supply chain and logistics and trying to get as much information about the disruptions and the spinning and banging and lack of synergy that's creating all of these multiple problems that are different day to day, and why it's important for us to adopt a rolling definition of normal. What's normal today? That's not the same as what was normal yesterday, and won't be the same as what will be normal tomorrow. We simply have to get information to make sure we've got the input to determine what our rolling definition is and how we're going to, as retailers, especially suppliers, react to this and be able to take advantage of it. And for bike shops, staying flexible and thinking outside the box is extremely important to the way you apply that thinking in your business plan to your future. So with that said, a little bit out of breath, let's move on to Q&A. Rochelle, do we have anybody that's got questions?
Perfect. Yeah, we got questions rolling in right now. So let's just go ahead and read as many as we can. So the first one we've got is, what do you see as the canary for the IBD to buy any bikes available from their existing brands?
What do I
Canary
see
for
as
the
the
IBD?
canary? I assume
Don't
this
know.
refers to the canary in the coal mine.
I'm thinking so.
Okay, well, it's the authorized dealer agreements. I think the place you start is if you're in a position where you've got an authorized dealer agreement with a big brand, make sure you understand thoroughly what you've signed, what it means, what they'll let you do, what they won't let you do. Ask them if it's important to you to have another brand to be able to deal with the future relative to the uncertainty that's been created around your situation with them or your relationship with them being the brands you've signed the authorized dealer agreements with. And if they come back and tell you you can't take on another brand, you can't do this, you can't do that, seriously consider dropping that authorized dealer agreement, terminating it, and moving on to the people that will let you be flexible and be able to sustain and grow your business for the future. So I would say the authorized dealer agreement is the canary in the coal mine. Test that first.
Perfect. And then we have, with respect to climate change and environment, has there been any studies on the impact of all the bike packaging? And then part two of the question, with the increase in bike pricing these days, I'm assuming the prices will never go down.
Well, relative to studies on packaging, there's been several, but essentially it boils down to, I have seen different percentages, but no more than 3 at the high 7% of plastics that are produced are recycled. So part of that says that you should eliminate plastics in packaging. There are several big brands that have already announced changes they've made relative to packaging to reduce both the unrecyclables and to increase the recyclables or reusables. I think this is going to be an ongoing discussion, but it certainly would behoove the American bicycle business and its supplier base in Asia to study this question carefully and to reduce to the bare minimum the required packaging. And I think look carefully at European law and regulation that basically requires that retailers deal with the right recycling in store, or words to that effect. So that just scratches the surface. And I'm sorry, what was the second part of that question?
It was, let's see, with the increase in bike pricing these days, I'm assuming the prices will never go down.
Never say never. There are some issues relative to bike pricing that at this point have not been passed through. Probably the freight cost is one of them. It hasn't all caught up. Probably some of the component pricing hasn't caught up either. So in other words, there's prices coming through the pipeline that haven't gotten to retail pricing yet. And it's going to be a while before we see that in the market. I do think that as we look into the future, while retail prices will go up, not just because of the cost of product, but because of the cost of getting product here or getting raw material into the plants, those will over time mollify, adjust. And again, you'll have price decreases coming through the pipelines. Avarice will mean that some of the folks will try to hold on to those increases and not pass the decreases through. This is why you need to look at the ESG, the environmental, social, and governance integration of the suppliers you do business with, the brands you do business with. And by the way, to put a face on that, the only certified B Corp in all of the American bicycle business in the top tier is Quality Bicycle Products. And I am not endorsing them. I'm simply pointing out that they have gone through a couple of years of intensive scrutiny in order to get a B Corp certification, which essentially goes to environmental, social, and governance integration. and their social responsibility. So I think that's going to be a growing issue as well relative to this question.
Thank you. Okay, so next question, what caused this breakdown in shipping related to COVID? Was it that drivers and container ship drivers, et cetera, dropped out of the workforce?
It depends on the country. You got a shortage of drivers in China because of the impacts of COVID, ditto in Taiwan. Then in turn, the shortage also is created by the increase in volumes. So in other words, the demand outstripped the available numbers of drivers that could get to trucks and drive. Folks making decisions that they simply don't want to drive truck anymore are certainly an issue. Here again, it's the asymmetric disruption that has been created by, and we talk about this within our own company, trying to understand the labor force better, but there's a whole crop of folks that were working for companies, I assume some of them driving vehicles of some type, pre-COVID, that dropped totally out of the workforce because they found out they could make a living, a good living, on the internet, online, and do it from their homes. So another stat to look at relative to that is the number of entrepreneurs, or the number of new businesses started in this country, has been the greatest it's ever been. U.S. government reported that there have been more new small businesses created in the United States in the last 20 months than we've ever had in the history of the country. And those are all young entrepreneurs or new entrepreneurs that have discovered they don't have to go to work for a place they don't particularly like, when they can make more than a living doing it at home on their computer. So it's again, all these disruptions, there are multiple waves that have created this situation, and it's created the imbalances that are going to take a long time to get back into some kind of cogent balance that will settle this down.
All right,
if I go on, I'm going to confuse myself and the audience.
We've got just one or two more here. Do we got time for that?
Yep.
Perfect. So the next one is, what external factors outside of supplier agreements would indicate the slowing demand of the public? We're seeing bike sales from suppliers to the public, suppliers opening new dealers in our backyard, etc. What do you see as the tipping point of excess inventory?
Well, that's an excellent question. It's also a detailed question, but I would say that the starting point is the NBDA consumer research that your association is about to launch. The NBDA is about to go to the consumer population of the United States with the first primary research that's been done since 2014. It's a large panel done by a very reputable firm, Sports Market Surveys. It's going to be done near term. Questionnaires are being prepared as we speak. And there will be available in October the core of the answer to that question, which is, what's the consumer think? Why did the consumer buy? What does the consumer think now? What's the consumer going to do? What's their intention to buy in the future? And so there'll be a much better answer to that question that'll come from the NBDA Consumer Research Project. And then in turn, I think you as a retailer or a supplier have to do what you can to think about the research you can do. And again, your marketing department, whether it's a retailer and it's you as the marketeer, or an assistant manager, or in the case of a smaller associate member, your marketing side has to really think in terms of how you survey and constantly survey and questions of your consumer, of the end user, and ask that question. I don't like focus groups, but still for retailers, they can be productive. Get together 12 really good customers every month or every week, set them down, ask a list of questions, keep those questions consistent, and ask them of different groups and then compare the answers, and ask your consumer what they think and what their views are. But start with the NBDA consumer research, which will be available in some form, including webinars like this, after the survey is completed and available October, November of this year.
Perfect, thank you. We've got one last question. Is there an issue with liability in buying used frames?
There are liability issues all over that unfortunately are going to well up as the Consumer Product Safety Commission actually is reactivated in the sense that it gets funding that it needs in order to be a real consumer product safety agency. You've already seen some of that in the public press, but yeah, I would carefully look at the liability issues and relative to either used frames, used bikes, even new product, lithium-ion batteries as an example. I think you talk to your insurance broker, and if need be, have them talk to the people underwriting your insurance and make sure that you assess the liability risk. Our group, Human Powered Solutions, does believe that there will be an increase in product liability activity and product liability litigation in the channel going forward, built around a number of things, but not the least of which is going to be use of electric bikes and also the lithium-ion battery. And then the recyclable, reusable will be part of this. But I will tell you that I have not heard of a big problem or even an appreciable problem in the used bike community. So until that surfaces or we do see something that that says it's going to be a problem, I would do the things I said earlier: is get a hold of your broker, assess them of the potential for your business of getting into used bikes or used frames, and then you make some determinations of what used products you simply won't deal with because of the risk. What comes to mind is, are you going to inspect carbon fiber frame or not? Are you going to inspect certain other types of frames? I mean, if you've got the question, you probably got the expertise, but you can find a way to assess it.
All right, thank you. So if people have any more questions afterward, can they contact you?
Absolutely. Let's see if I can get I'm pushing the button to move to the next slide. Well, while it's doing that, my email is jay@humanpoweredsolutions.com. jay@humanpoweredsolutions.com. And if that doesn't work, I'm sure the NBDA can give you my contact information.
Yeah, info@nbda.com. And we can get your question to Jay or give you Jay's contact information, whichever you prefer. So thank you so much for being with us here today, Jay. We really appreciate you, and thanks for the great info.
I enjoyed doing it. And for anybody else that's got more questions or comments, as I said, jay@humanpoweredsolutions, or ask the NBDA and they'll put you in contact with me. And thank you very much. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks so much.